The return of China and India as the region's most influential countries will inevitably challenge the fragile post-World War II system set up by the United States. In a region as diverse as East Asia, can the Westphalian interstate model remain predominant, or will it be supplanted by new East Asian models?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Philip Stevens. I'm a columnist on the Financial Times. I wanted, first of all, to thank the Asan Institute for inviting me here. I owe them particular thanks. I don't know if people in the audience know what columnists do. Well, what we do is we travel around the world talking to bright people, stealing out their ideas and presenting them in the newspaper as our own. And all I can say is I've already filled up 2 notebooks today, so if any of you see your ideas appearing in the FT, I thank you. Kirk Campbell kindly referred to me earlier as a citizen of the world, which I took as a compliment, although I'm not sure he meant it. But I am a European, and as has been said, there are not many of us here. That's our fault, rather than the fault of the Institute. Europe doesn't pay enough attention to this part of the world. But as a European, and provoked, I think, a little by Stephen Krasner's brilliant opening exposition this morning, I just wanted to say one thing about Europe, and it's to take a slightly different view on history from Stephen before we start, because in Europe next year we're going to commemorate the beginning of the First World War, the Great War, we call it. It's a war as futile, pointless as any in history. And if you roll back to 1 year to 1913, you find that most of the people in Europe, although there were obvious tensions between the great powers, and most people in Europe were convinced that there wasn't going to be a war. What they said was, look at the this was the first era of globalization, look at the economic interdependence, look at the mutual interests. It's not possible that the powers will go to war. What in fact happened, of course, was that mistrust and miscalculation turned out to trump mutual interest. And as a European, look at East Asia, I see some worrying parallels. You see some strident nationalisms, some rekindling of old enmities, deep-rooted grievances, hedging and balancing strategies. You see disputes over territory, unlikely alliances between former adversaries, and above all, you see a region that's struggling to accommodate a rising power, in this case China, in the case then Germany, that's really a bit too big for its own region. In 100 years ago, it was the UK that was the offshore balancer. Now it's the US. So I think there are some parallels. Obviously, there are big differences. History doesn't rerun itself. But I think there are enough common elements between these 2 historical episodes to merit study and to try not to repeat some of the mistakes that were made then. But I won't go on any further, so we'll turn to East Asia. We have, as you can see, an absolutely stellar cast. It seems to me that there are 3 things going on in East Asia, but I'm sure that they'll correct me. The 3 things, most obviously, the rise of China. Also, though, the rise of these nationalisms. And then, thirdly, the interaction between those 2 and the return of the US as a major power. And it seems the dynamics of those 3 big trends is going to set the path for East Asia in the next 5, 10, 20 years. Whether it will be peaceful or otherwise, we'll discover. I'm going to turn first, and I'm not going to give long introductions. The panelists will forgive me, but they're all in your books. These are very distinguished people. They should all be known to you, but I'm going to turn first to Dr. Choi Kang, who's the Dean of Planning and Assessment at the Korea National Academy. He's had many important posts before that, and he's going to give us, I think, the view from the region about whether we're talking about an East Asian order or an East Asian disorder.
May I start?
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Philip, for a kind introduction. I speak for myself. I do not speak for the Foreign Ministry at all. So, as Philip already mentioned, East Asia is experiencing some kinds of transitional moment. I like call maybe twilight zone. So maybe some people calling as a kind of Asian paradox. Over the years, actually, there have been more elements for cooperation. On the other hand, in recent years, we have seen the rise of this some frictions and also discontent among the great powers. So I think still the evolution is going on. So unpredictability actually is the main theme and characteristic in East Asia. So from the South Korean perspective, there are two things going on. One is a structural change, as Philip already mentioned, is the rise of China and also the power transition. I think that maybe for the past several years, the power transition has been the dominant theme in South Korea. So whether the United States is able to maintain its dominant position or not. On the other hand, maybe the China is going to be more powerful than the United States, at least in regional perspective. So we'll see what constitutes the power in the 21st century, in the new security environment or new strategic environment. It seems to me that to a certain degree, China has the physical power and also maybe exercising its physical power in its own way. But on the other hand, we see the recovery of U.S. economy and also U.S. try to be more engaged, more tied up with the regional affairs very much. Actually, that's a rebalanced strategy of the United States is the theme that Obama administration has been following. So I see that the second Obama administration will follow the path. The challenge for that, I think, is whether the United States can provide the more feasible things to its regional allies and regional friends in this region. So we'll see this unstable transition from this one unipolar world to a more, whether it's going to be bipolar or multipolar, we'll see. So we are struggling what kinds of structural change, what are the implications of that structural change upon the other issues. That's one. Second issue, contextual change in East Asia. Nowadays we are talking about the various issues that actually including trade or human rights or new regional architecture or the non-traditional security issues. On that dimension, I think we have seen the rise of cooperation among the countries in the region. For example, Korea, Japan, and China are cooperating and also agreed to have a trilateral FTA in the region. So we'll see this, and also there are many things going on in East Asia in a positive way. So, but the key issue is that whether there is a strategic trust among the countries in the region. At this point of time, I don't see any lasting strategic trust among the players in the region. For example, as whether the United States and China and other countries share the common vision for the future of East Asia. I don't see any common elements existing nowadays at this point of time. While they are trying to manage the relations, but they have not agreed on the regional architecture or regional order on this region. So nowadays we are talking about the norms and regulations and all the customs. We will live with them. But we have no idea what kinds of norms and regulations are beneficial for everybody in the region. If we can agree on that, maybe the outcome may be the minimum denominator, not the maximum one. So to have everybody on the board, we will go for the minimum level rather than the maximum level. That would be the case. But in the meantime, with the inauguration of new leaders in almost every country in the region, I think there is some chance to build up new strategic trust among the new leaders and also have more strategic dialogue to breed up that kind of strategic trust among the country. On the other hand, as Philip already mentioned, the rise of nationalism is the concern we have, and a returning of old issues. So returning of 19th century territorial dispute going on, and also we have no idea, we have not agreed on the interpretation of the past history. I would not emphasize what's going on between Korea and Japan at this point of time, but we should be able to manage, if not overcoming the past, manage the impact of these old issues upon the future. But first, we need to have a rather common understanding of the past history and also try to separate that issues from the other issues. There are many things we can do together, but sometimes these history issues and emotional things override almost every issue. For example, last year, Korea and Japan was about to agree on the GSOMIA, but because of this territorial dispute, we were not able to do so. But we should be able to separate that issues and manage the relations for the sake of regional stability and prosperity in the coming years and days. And also, as I said before, but sometimes, as I said, we have seen the rise of cooperation in the region. The trade, we are much more interdependent upon each other. The trade issue is one, and also there are many things we are doing together within the region. So, for example, nowadays we are talking about the HADR, the humanitarian assistance disaster relief that's going on. And also there are many things to do together, but sometimes these issues are overshadowed by this rise of nationalistic sentiments. So we should be able to do so. But still, I'm optimistic about the future because now we have new leaders, and new leaders know that clearly interdependence is increasing in the region. So they try to manage the relation, if not able to find a solution. But I think we will be in a better position to manage the situation. Second, and also that because of this element, I don't know whether there could be a spillover effect of cooperation in one area to other area. But if we are going to cooperate on these non-traditional security issues, I hope that kind of experience will help us cooperate in more strategic issues. So building up some strategic trust and also to minimize the strategic misunderstanding among each other. And third things, like for example, in the meantime for that, I think we need to have a more dialogue and more strategic communication between and among ourselves. So I think there's nowadays we are talking about minilateralism. So I expect there could be a more trilateral or the quadrilateral talks, issue-specific dialogue. So if those things are flourished, I can say that we will be in a better position to manage the relations and find a way to enhance the stability in the region. And finally, I think there's at least one common element existing among all powers. We should be able to manage and limit damage limitation things. So we should be able to manage the damage of one issue area over the others. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Choi, thank you very much. Some very interesting points there. New leaders, an opportunity to gain a common understanding of history, if not an agreement, and an opportunity to build a strategic trust. I'm going to turn to Ed Feulner, who, as everyone knows, is the chairman of Heritage's Asian Studies Center. The US policy seems to be to engage and hedge as far as China is concerned. Is that the right policy, and what contribution does it make to the stability of this part of the world?
It's a mixed bag, Philip, but let me answer by first making an assertion, and that is those of you who've known me, and I'm glad that I actually am the first American on the panel to be able to speak before my good friend Evans and Michael, because I can make, I think, some of the points that I hope we will share. I'm known in Washington as a congenital optimist, and what I'd like to do, I think, is lay out kind of my own perspective in terms of where we are, not only vis-a-vis China, but generally in the region, and particularly at a time when, for those of us from Washington, are very much looking forward to President Park's visit to Washington just a week from today. When she will be there, she'll have the opportunity to address a joint session of Congress. There'll be the usual state dinners and the rest, but celebrating 60 years of an alliance here that I think is is important for a number of reasons. Number one, U.S. interest in and commitment to Asia is genuinely bipartisan. It's not really, and here I guess I would dispute a little bit what my friend Doug Bandow said in the last panel in this room. It's not a partisan issue really to speak of at all. Look back on the presidential debates last year, Asia just didn't come up as an issue. Oh, there were differences of emphasis between Romney and Obama in terms of what they were saying about China, but by and large, Asia was not a point of debate. Second point I want to remind everyone is that, as former Secretary Gates said on several occasions, the United States is a resident power in Asia. We have been for a long time, despite our own budgetary constraints that others have talked about during the course of today. We will continue to be a resident power. There is no significant Washington presence today calling for real cuts in terms of our commitments to Asia. I've got enough gray hair or lost hair to remember when this was not the case in Washington, when there were calls for troop pullouts from Korea, for major drawdowns in terms of U.S. commitments to Asia. Not so today. Third point I'd make, and with due deference, General, I remind everyone that the United States is still the only superpower. Yes, the trend line is with China growing at 7% a year, the United States growing at 2% a year. The trend line is different from the current status quo, but at this stage of the game, the United States is still the only superpower. And related closely to that is the relationships that the United States has throughout the region. Those relationships are not based simply on bilateral agreements that were signed by our ancestors in office who now have airports named for them near Washington or something like that. They're continuing, and they were based on a real set of principles. Commitment basically to free market economics, to a free economy internationally in terms of free trade, and a commitment to democratic principles. Our friends in China don't have a set of comparable principles in terms of either the region or in terms of their own potential relationships in the future. In fact, as one of my colleagues said not long ago, when China grows, others worry. And whether we're talking about China growing economically, politically, or militarily, there are concerns when that happens. The reverse side of that, which, again, I'm an optimist, and I put it forward as being an optimistic and positive development, is that there is a commitment in Washington, under both Republicans and Democrats, that there is one China. And this is a settled issue. It's not something that's really debated anymore. It's about as permanent as most of these issues get. Similarly, there's a bipartisan commitment, as I've already averred, to free trade. The Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement was negotiated largely under the Bush administration, completed successfully under Obama, didn't pass really until the Republicans regained control of the House of Representatives. Bipartisanly, it passed. It's still, and I still think in terms of TPP and other regional economic variables, that there is a bipartisan commitment to it. Harder to maintain when we're in tough economic times, but still very much there. The sixth point I'd make is that, again, on a bipartisan basis, there's a commitment to America's alliances in the region. The bilateral alliance not only with Korea, but with Japan, with Australia, and even a legal relationship that we have with Taiwan. Each of them different, each of them though, locking the United States in again as that resident power in Asia. The final point I'd make is that under every administration, the diplomatic architecture of how the United States relates to various countries or various regions will differ. I commend the Obama administration very strongly for their Asia pivot, for the reaffirmation that the United States is that resident power in Asia, and that the United States has very vital, not only national interests, but also interests with our colleagues, our friends, and everyone in the region in terms of developing a more positive international relationship here. In conclusion, I'd say that the United States' role and relationship throughout the region at this stage is steady, reliable, healthy, and strong. And I hope that all of my countrymen, whether in Washington in the policy process or involved in trade and economic issues around the country, should do everything they can to maintain and encourage that.
Thank you very much. So there we have a picture, as you say, of a steady, reliable, and strong resident power in Asia. I'm going to turn to General Pan Shen Chen. Sorry, is that right? And ask him, and he is a senior advisor to the China Forum, a former major general in the PLA, and a director of studies at the Institute of Strategic Studies of the Beijing Defense University. I want to start with a small question before you go into how comfortable do you feel in this part of the world with the US as a strong, reliable, and steady resident of this part of the world? I was at something we were talking earlier about how the free thinking that goes on at the Central Party School in Beijing, and I was at something a couple of years ago there, and someone said, well, the US had its Monroe Doctrine. Why don't we have our Monroe Doctrine? What's the problem? So how comfortable is China?
Well, I cannot speak for China. I can only speak for myself.
Okay, your impression.
So I think I'm quite comfortable with the United States presence in Asia Pacific. Of course, United States is a resident state here, and as the only world superpower, the United States is a resident state everywhere. And therefore, I acknowledge that Washington has legitimate interest in this region. And to be quite frank, that China look forward to a kind of a constructive role played by the United States in this region. And therefore, we really expect quite a lot development of what we call a new type of major powers relations, featuring equality, mutual respect, and mutual benefit, cooperation. And I think that's very important, mutual respect. I cannot say that the two countries have much trust in each other. There are still a lot of kind of misgivings, both sides towards each other. But even amidst trust deficit, the two countries still can cooperate. But I think the challenge is whether the two countries could respect each other's core interests. I think that when we are talking about the future world order, or you may say that the regional order in East Asia, I think that we should not be really too pessimistic. I think that we have already some very important kind of bedrock for the future kind of community building in this region. Now, first of all, I think that we should see the dynamic of economic development in this region. And as a result of this, there are quite a number of new economies emerging. And I think that because of this, there is a common, or I would say shared kind of interest in seeing cooperation among these states. There is a shared interest in seeing peace and stability in this region. No country actually wants to see military conflict in East Asia. And I think that one of the reasons why this is because major players in this region are so heavily interdependent on each other. And therefore, despite a lot of kind of frictions, I don't think that all these countries can go back to Cold War years confrontation, simply because there is not such a concern of zero-sum game in state-to-state relations. And also, I think that you should also notice that East Asia has already quite a number of kind of bilateral as well as multilateral regional cooperation mechanisms. They are not very perfect in the functions, but I think that each could play a role in promoting mutual trust and the mutual benefit. So I think that given all these things, I think that we have quite a strong material basis for the future cooperation among the states in this region. But of course, there are problems, a lot of big problems. Now, like I just tried to name a few: nuclear proliferation and maritime disputes. It's not all just about China. You just name just two of these East Asian states, you could see some kind of maritime disputes or differences on the maritime boundary delineations. And then we have two states not yet unified, China and Korea. And then we have very serious kind of, as I said, the trust deficit among major powers, particularly between China and the United States. All these problems cannot be overcome overnight. They will be there. But I think that as long as we have a new kind of vision for security, not resorting to the Cold War type of kind of approach taking state-to-state relations as a kind of zero-sum nature, and building up its own security at the expense of the security of others. As long as we seek another approach, what we call building a kind of a community of co-prosperity in East Asia, and then I think that we may be on the right track for the regional order, which is sustained and effective and conducive to the states, not only a group of states, but to the states all over the region. Now, China's role. I think it's legitimate to expect that China could be another kind of major power, and China could play a role just like the traditional pattern that the rising power would always be at the expense of the interests of the existing powers. I think that could be an option. But for me, I don't think that this is the only option. I think there is even a greater option than that, and that is China could provide opportunity for the development of security and the peace and the stability of the region rather than a threat. Now, why? Now, first of all, I would say that China's rise is not really the reality today. China's rise is a process. Now, in my view, it would take decades to try for China to reach a well-to-do kind of a status. And therefore, during this process of so-called China's rise, I think China is basically inward-looking. China would only focus on the resolution of so many problems. You see, that will be in a way for sustained development. You may have another workshop for me to talk what these problems are, but you could imagine, it's like a country with a 1.3 or 1.4 billion populations, and our problems is evidently larger than all the problems perhaps of other countries. Inward looking. And because we want to focus on our domestic development, we wish to have a peaceful, stable international environment. We do not want to challenge the interests of other countries. Now, it sounds like a cliche, but I think that it's really true. And I think more importantly, why China would become an opportunity is because China's development would have to be embedded in the world health of world economic health. The health of United States in its economic performance. We wish to see the speedy recovery of this world financial crisis, because that really works in our interest. And therefore, I could understand that some kind of a fear of other countries for the rise of China. I could understand it. But I think that now we have to be on guard that exaggerated fear would generate misjudgment, would generate excessive response. And then I think that would be the bad news for this region. I thank you.
General Pan, thank you very much. As we've heard, this panel is resolutely resisting my effort to stir up pessimism about the future of the region. But some very strong points. And you did, I'm glad to say, at least mention the problems, the challenges, whether they're nuclear proliferation, the territorial disputes, and I think critically, the absence of trust. Perhaps we'll come back to you in a moment about what China might contribute to improving trust as well as others. But I'm going to turn to Evans Revere, who's a senior fellow at Brookings and a senior director of the Albright Stonebridge Group. He was president of the Korea Society and one of few in this room who's, I think, been to Pyongyang. But I suspect you're not going to be pessimistic, but I live in hope.
I think you'll find my presentation in accordance with your earlier expressed wishes. Let me begin by thanking all of you for being here. A special word of thanks to Representative Chung and President Ham for their initiative and vision in making this forum possible. We are really indebted to them. And a special word of thanks to the incredible staff of the Asan Institute who have just managed this, as they always do, brilliantly. And thanks to that. And thanks in particular for inviting yet another New Yorker here. We are here in our resident capacity as experts in disorder. And I feel I have a special talent in that area, growing up where I did and experiencing what I did. So I think I can address some of the topics that we've been talking about here with some measure of authority and experience. I suspect I'm not the only one in this room today who has noted the ironic juxtaposition of the tasks that we are assigned here on this panel to address, which is the prospect and possibility of building a new order in East Asia, and the overall theme of the plenum this year, which reminds us that there is plenty of potential for disorder out there. And I do agree with that idea, that there is, if not potential for disorder, tremendous potential for uncertainty in this region for many years to come. And it's in that context that I have come to the conclusion, and I'll open with my conclusion, that I don't think that the core pillars of the post-World War II system that have been in place for these many years have passed their prime. I still think that they are extremely relevant. I still think that they're extremely valuable, and I think that they will, by and large, continue to function in the future. And so if I had to summarize what I'm going to say for the next few minutes, I could do it very simply by just saying that the reports of the death or demise or the impending death of the post-World War II system in this region are greatly exaggerated and highly premature. I don't see China becoming the dominant regional player in the sense that some have perceived it as becoming in the coming years. I don't believe, quite frankly, that East Asia is ready for a European-style spate of community building. I do believe that there is plenty of life left in the U.S.-led liberal democratic system and in the U.S. alliance system in this region. I also believe that the U.S. economic recovery, together with our growing energy independence and the renewed understanding on the part of our leadership in Washington about how important it is for us to play a leading role in this region, I think all of those things together are likely to guarantee that the United States is going to remain a strong and dominant player in this region and indeed in the globe for the long term. That is not to say that I don't recognize the increasing power and capability of China. I mean, that's an obvious, it's a given. China's rise is indeed changing regional dynamics in interesting ways. The increased economic strength and military capabilities of China simply cannot be ignored and should not be ignored. Integrating an economically powerful and militarily capable China into this region is going to be a crucial task for all of us, all the countries represented in this room. And so we'll be ensuring that China continues to play a responsible and constructive regional role. And I don't rule out the possibility that we'll be able to do that and we'll succeed in doing so. But China's renaissance, as has already been pointed out on a number of the panels during the course of the day, has prompted a lot of speculation that somehow a new China-centric order is on the verge of being achieved in this region. And some have gone beyond that to say that that ascension by China, renaissance by China, is being accompanied by a real decline in the U.S. role in the region, U.S. capabilities, U.S. power, and that Japan's influence is also eroding, and that some people also hold that the post-World War II system, this order, is fraying. I don't agree. I think it would be a mistake to presume that the pillars on which this post-war order has rested are indeed fraying or on the verge of collapsing. And I say this because as you look around the region, as you visit the region, as you talk to regional leaders, What you hear is a profound concern, to be very frank with you, about China's ambitions, about China's assertiveness, that's a word that you hear all too often, and about the lack of transparency in terms of China's future intentions with respect to its neighbors and those beyond. The territorial disputes that have been mentioned already with many of China's neighbors have created, continue to create a considerable level of unease between China and some of its key neighbors. And China's handling of some of these, and I cite specifically the Senkaku-Diaoyu dispute, the dispute with the Philippines, the recent military exercise that took place very close to Malaysia. I think all of those things have rattled, unnerved some of China's neighbors, and have even raised concerns in some quarters that there is almost a sense of China's willingness to use military force. And some references to China's willingness to do that have actually been made by some players in Beijing. And most recently, we heard a spokesman for China refer to the Senkaku-Diaoyu issue as a core interest of China, something that we had not previously heard before, and that has certainly raised some eyebrows, since we know what China has defined elsewhere as its core interests and what it has said it is prepared to do to defend its core interests. So this has raised some interesting questions, including if China is now prepared to define this as a core interest, what else might it do? Might it decide to connect the 9 dashes and define a large piece of the South China Sea as territorial waters, etc.? So these are some of the questions that are being raised. I think all of the concerns that I've mentioned have prompted regional actors to urge the United States to play a more active role in the region's economy, in its diplomacy, and in terms of preserving the region's security. And the United States obviously has responded positively to that. All of these urgings that Washington is hearing effectively have been received positively because these countries were pushing on an open door. The Obama administration came into office determined to reaffirm, reassert, and reinvigorate the U.S. role in the Asia-Pacific region, and they have done exactly that. Earlier today, we heard a listing of a number of the military steps that the United States has taken to demonstrate its commitment to the region. But Kurt Campbell very helpfully reminded us earlier today that the military component of this is only one small part of the overall reaffirmation and reassertion of America's overall role in the region. Meanwhile, the recent crisis, I call it recent, I don't think we're out of it yet, the recent crisis on the Korean Peninsula reminded every player in the region, every actor in the region, of the important role that the United States plays in maintaining peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula and in the immediate vicinity of it. And I would just pose a question to the panelists and the audience here. Who else in the region is prepared to do that? Who else is prepared to carry that burden in doing what the United States has recently done in terms of reaffirming our alliance relationships with South Korea and Japan, sending very clear deterrent signals to North Korea, and trying to reassure, even as we demonstrated our ability to deal with a whole range of contingencies. China, it's not clear, for example, that China is prepared to step up and play a role similar to that of the United States in the Korean Peninsula or elsewhere. Quite the contrary. I think there are a number of indications that suggest that China is not ready or is not interested in doing so. China's views on the Korean Peninsula are obviously evolving, but I don't think China is yet in a place where we can say China is prepared to work very closely with the United States and be of a similar mind in dealing with North Korea in the sort of forthright way that I think we need to deal with North Korea in. Meanwhile, I'd already mentioned these various territorial disputes, but I think it's fair to say that disputes over history and territory, islands, waters, all of these things between Japan, China, Korea, between and among these three countries, all of those things remind us that there are some very dark clouds that hang over the relationships between and among these three actors. These old resentments are still there, are still very troubling, and have the potential to flare up on a moment's notice.
Mr. Revere, I'm going to...
Yeah, I'll wrap it up now. And all of these things, I think, serve as ongoing barriers to regional integration and to building the sort of community that we all would like to see in the region, but we're not likely to see any time soon. Just a couple of final points here. I have every reason to believe that there is plenty of life left in the current pillars of the system that preserves peace and stability in this region, particularly the role of the United States, our alliance relationships, and our partnerships with others in the region. Obviously, there are changing relationships between and among the actors and players in this region. And there is a new and emerging role for China to play, and I certainly support that and welcome that. But let's not assume that the framework for managing all of this that has existed for these many years has lost its utility. And as we manage possible future disorder or try to manage uncertainty in the future, I think some of the traditional instruments and mechanisms that have proved so useful over the decades are going to be with us and be very useful to us for a long time to come.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Another rather upbeat assessment, an enduring US presence and a framework that's still fit for purpose as far as the region's concerned. Final speaker, and I'm afraid this is becoming a zero-sum game because I want to get some discussion with the wider group here, but Michael Schiffer, who's a senior advisor and counselor of the Democratic staff at the Senate, has worked at a senior level in the Pentagon, Asian affairs. I'd just like you in your remarks perhaps to address, as well as your own thoughts, two particular thoughts. One, everyone talks about this being a bipartisan commitment to Asia policy. Seen from the Congress, is it as durable as administrations sometimes say? Or can you imagine a period 10, 15 years out when American politicians are looking inwards and saying, hey, we don't need the trouble in Asia, we don't need it in the Middle East, and we don't need it in Asia? And the second question, I think, is the extent to which the US is, how far will the US extend its sort of security umbrella? Is the US, if you like, guarantee to countries, to other countries in this region, a blank check? If Japan decides to take a more assertive policy in the Senkaku, does the treaty guarantee extend to that? So how far is the US guarantee, if you like, a blank check to these other regional powers?
Well, thank you, and I will try to be brief, as I recognize that I'm the last speaker on the last panel that stands between this discussion and dinner. But let me also thank the Asan Institute and, like Dr. Choi mentioned, that my views are my own, hopefully my own. To answer your two questions briefly, I mean, my sense is that yes, there is broad bipartisan support for the rebalance to the Asia Pacific and the broad contours of the policy that the Obama administration has sketched out. But having said that, we have seen times in our country's past, the who lost China debate, after the Second World War and in the early years of the Cold War, for example, when Asia policy has been very much the subject of heated partisan difference. And for those that look back just a few months ago at the way in which Israel was treated during the presidential election campaign, Israel and other country and issue that is subject to broad bipartisan support. It doesn't take that much of an imagination to get to a point where one could imagine that various elements of the rebalance, various elements of our policy in the Asia-Pacific region become subject to hot partisan divide. And that doesn't even really get to the question that you raised, which is the broader back and forth, as we've witnessed a number of times in our nation's history, between a sentiment of the necessity for engagement and forward-leaning international involvement and more deep-seated sense of isolationism. And it is entirely possible that the sort of exhaustion that I think many Americans feel now, especially when they think about the broader Middle East, Afghanistan, could extend to a more global desire to withdraw that would affect our policy in the region. I don't think that's likely. I think there is a solid center across both political parties that will hold, and a broad recognition of just how vital and important for our own interests continued engagement in the Asia-Pacific region is. But one certainly can't be complacent or assume that, oh no, that will never happen. In terms of your second question, just how broad the U.S. security umbrella and set of guarantees is, let me take a slightly sort of different approach to the question, not sort of a mechanistic answer to, well, this is what our treaty between the United States and Japan, or our treaty commitment to the Republic of Korea looks like, and suggest that this is really a question of the sorts of principles that animate our approach and our engagement in the region, and the sort of principles, frankly, that animate the rebalance as well. When we look at the success and the dynamism of the Asia-Pacific region, and the success that this region has experienced for the past 6 decades, one can't and one shouldn't assume that success, that dynamism, peace, prosperity, stability was by any means a foregone conclusion. That success was very much the result of a very clear and conscious set of choices that were made in the United States and by countries in the region. And those choices were essentially boiled down to a set of commitments to free and open commerce, open access to all, to the global commons of sea, air, space, and now I would add cyberspace to the mix, a commitment to a just regional order, and an institutional order that emphasizes both rights and responsibilities, and the fidelity to the rule of law, a commitment to emerging regional architecture and institutions, an open and inclusive approach to regional architecture that has a real functional problem-solving element to it, and a commitment to resolving conflict peacefully through diplomacy and through dialogue, and to seeking to develop mechanisms that can legitimately arbitrate differences and disputes. The U.S. commitment to the region, as it plays out through our bilateral alliance commitments, as it plays out through our engagement in multilateral architecture and institution, is a commitment to those principles. And I would suggest that insofar as countries of the region are willing and able to continue to commit to upholding those principles, there is every prospect for continued success, dynamism, peace, stability, and security that we've seen. And insofar as countries may choose to seek to defect from those principles, then we have the prospect for instability. And when I think about U.S. policy orientation and what it may take to trigger the sort of engagement in the region that you were suggesting, I think of it very much in those terms.
Okay. Thank you very much. A very clear, as you put it, principles-based commitment to the region. Rather than trying to sort of continue to conduct the discussion from here, we've got, I'm told, about 14 or 15 minutes. So what I propose to do is to open up to the floor and get some comments and some criticisms and some questions, and then go back to each of the speakers and wrap it up like that rather than fill the time myself. So who would like to be first? And pessimists are welcome. This gentleman here, if you could just say who you are.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. I'm Su Hao from China, from University. The topic of this panel is focused on the regional, the new world order in East Asia. Regarding the East Asia, in my observation, personal observation, is recently 2 years in Americans' policy description. For example, like 2011, the former State Secretary Hillary Clinton gave a speech, second speech in Hawaii. He talking quite a lot about the Pacific, and he did not mention the East Asia, as the entity of the policies target. And later on, she talking about the Pacific Century or the similes of the region of the Pacific, something like that. So it seems to me that in Americans' policy thinking, East Asia is not the real entity for the policy preparation. So my question to our American panelists is that, is there any East Asia as a policy entity? This is my first question. And second question related to this first is that regarding, given the East Asia as the physical entity there, in my observation, there's two tendencies of East Asia from now on. One is the regional cooperatives architecture building in East Asia. There's the 10+3s or East Asia Summit there. And the second is there's quite a lot of problems within the East Asia. And for example, like the territory disputes or even the potential confrontation between countries in East Asia. Frankly speaking, maybe there's something behind of the American presence there. So my question to our American panelists is that, do you like the similes of East Asia, or is there splitting East Asia? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Gentleman here. Just the microphone's just coming.
I'd like to raise a very essential view. Very few in and around Northeast Asia has addressed the establishment of a Northeast Asian community. I don't know why. I'd like to ask to Chinese panelists, we have to make very enormous efforts to set up a Northeast Asian community as part of creating lasting peace and stability in this region. What's your opinion? Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes, the gentleman just there.
Kui Bo Huang, National Cheng University, Taipei, Taiwan, Republic of China. The current policy of the Manchu administration in Taiwan on the South China Sea and Diaoyutai or Senkaku Islands is that Taiwan will never cooperate with mainland China to defend these areas. But just in case, if the next administration of Taiwan said, okay, I'm considering cooperating or coordinating some, defensive behavior in those areas with mainland China, what would be U.S. take on that? Or what would be your take on that?
Okay.
Just in case.
Fine. Was the lady just in front there?
Thanks, Philip. Ellen Lapson from the Stimson Center. I have a very simple question about geography. we're using the phrase East Asia here. Is everybody comfortable with that? Or what about this new concept of the Indo-Pacific region, an even wider set of boundaries for what we are talking about when we talk about Asia? Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, so we've just final one here, and then we'll turn back to the speakers.
Alan Romberg, also from the Stimson Center. My question's for Michael Schiffer. You talked about a principles-based basis for the U.S. to be involved and have these commitments and so on. First of all, what do you have in mind that would be an alternative to that? Just realistically, do you have something that you think could happen? And second, the U.S. has a lot of interest here. It's not just a matter of commitment to freedom, democracy, all those good things. How much of a change would you think the United States would actually make in its thinking about its involvement? It seems to me the rebalancing is all about the fact that yes, values are important, but it's not just that. And so I wonder how you would look at that.
Okay, so we've got a range of all interesting questions. A couple on, what does the US really mean in its focus on East Asia? Questions which we didn't really address about the sort of institutional architecture for the region and the East Asian Summit and the rest, and then a challenge to the very concept of the region. Shouldn't we be looking more broadly? How would the US handle Taiwan and China coordinating their position on some of the islands? So what I'd like to do, because we've only got a few minutes, is ask in reverse order each of the panelists to sort of pick one or two, if they're sort of 20 seconds each, of those questions and comments and address them.
I guess that means I get to go first. I guess in terms of the questions related to how we think about the region and what's geographic or political designation we give it, and that cut across a couple of different questions. I personally prefer just the simple Asia-Pacific region. I think East Asia is too constraining and also suggests that the United States is not internal to the region, and I would argue that the United States is very much not just a resident power, but internal to the Asia-Pacific region. And I am personally not wild about the Indo-Pacific nomenclature, because I think it's not something that the Indians react to all that well, and it also I think creates a misimpression in Beijing about what it is the United States is up to, that in fact is not the case. And so I actually, other than for simply talking about PACOM's area of responsibility, I don't think it's a particularly useful designation. I'm going to take a pass entirely on the Taiwan question, because I long ago learned not to answer hypotheticals. In terms of Alan's question, which I guess I can't take a pass on because it was really directed at me, of course the United States has clear interests in the region as well. It's a happy and lucky coincidence for us, I suppose, that many of the principles that I enumerated, like free and open commerce, happen to be instrumental ways in which we can go about achieving our interests. But I also believe that those interests and the pursuit of those interests are not antithetical to the ability of others in the region to be able to likewise pursue their interests. That's one of the reasons why I have a slight allergic reaction to when countries talk about core interests, because core interests has a very non-zero, or actually has a very zero-sum, mutually exclusive ring to it that I don't think is at all appropriate or useful when we think about how it is that we need to be seeking to achieve our interests and further our values in the 21st century.
Just very quickly, let me just pick up 2 points. One regarding Northeast Asia, if I can carve out that one very big piece of an even bigger region. The point was made about the potential for trilateral cooperation in Northeast Asia. I would just draw everyone's attention to the ongoing inability of Beijing, Seoul, and Tokyo to put together a summit meeting that everyone knows would be to the advantage of all the players in the region to get them all at the same table talking about these issues. But the ongoing inability of those three countries and those three capitals to do this makes the very point that I was making during my earlier presentation, that the notion of a community of nations, a cooperative community of nations in the region, that notion is not quite ready for prime time yet, unfortunately, even though I support the idea. The other point I would make, I'm not going to touch that Taiwan issue, but I will address a different one and just remind everyone that lost in all of the developments regarding the Senkaku Diaoyu issue is the fact that Taiwan and Japan came to a very interesting and creative agreement to allow both countries to exploit the resources around these disputed islands, and neither country gave up anything in terms of its assertion of sovereignty. It was very creative and interesting, not solution to a problem, but an interesting fix of one important aspect of this problem. And I had hoped, perhaps vainly, that idea, that negotiated agreement might serve as the basis for Beijing and Tokyo to do something similar, to sort of set aside the contentious issue of sovereignty and work on something that they could cooperate on in building an agreement to access the resources. And unfortunately, the word from Beijing is not only are they not interested in it, they express some rather strong objections to it. And that's unfortunate, I think. It's not there.
General Pan, and here I'm just going to break the rules a little bit because I'm going to add one tiny question of my own to your list, which is, when do you think China, the PLA, will engage in a really serious bilateral dialogue with the US military?
Is it a tiny question?
All you have to give me is a date, 2014, 15, or...
I didn't get any kind of briefing before I came here, just because of the chief of the staff of the United States, General Dempsey, has a dialogue with his counterparts in China.
Okay.
But I heard that the dialogue is very productive and seem to lead in some kind of a better understanding of each other's concerns, and also working out some kind of roadmap for a mill-to-mill kind of a contact, at least for a couple of years to come. So I guess that this is another indication that despite the frictions between the two countries, the different opinions, the disagreements on many issues, the two countries still can work together as long as each respect the other side for his core interests. And I'm surprised to hear Evans say that he was surprised to hear that China called Diaoyudao and our territory in South China is not our core interest. And I'm not sure any other country would not regard the part of its territory as not the core interest. So I think that China behaves just like other countries do. And I think here, having said that China has all its good faith in developing constructive kind of relationship with all the other countries, China is not a pacifist country. China also has its own sovereignty and territorial integrity to take care of, just like other countries. And therefore, I could guess that with the maritime disputes, it's working into a kind of uncertain kind of area. And I would not be surprised that China would have more input for our defensive capabilities. Well, we do this just like our Stanford professor this morning said, we are not behaving like a rising power in the past, like Germany or Japan or any other country as a kind of expansionist kind of ambition. We don't have an expansionist ambition. All we got is something that left over by our ancestors. You see, all these border disputes were not created by the new China, which was founded in 1949. You see, they were already there, you see, and some of them cropped up in 1970s. You see, so I think that I can assure you, while China would be in all its good faith and try to develop good relations with other countries, China would have to take care and see how its sovereignty is protected. By the way, I just also raised a small point to Dr. Chen and Asan Institute. I noticed that our colleague from Taiwan claimed that he comes from the Republic of China. And I also noticed that in your introduction book, in one place, Taiwan is referred as a country. I hope that this kind of mistake should not be repeated, particularly in a country which is so kind of friendly relations with China. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Feulner.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to say what a friendly, upbeat, and optimistic final panel this was of the day. So I think I will avoid commenting on Taiwan at the moment. I would say in terms of further evidence of bipartisan cooperation and spirit that, Michael, I think you've got it. I'll go with Asia Pacific. And sorry, Ellen. But it's just looking at it in terms of what from our own perspective anyway, back in the United States, that would be, I think, the best way to define it. We'll have opportunities tomorrow, I know, to talk more in depth with others about some of the internal flashpoints that still confront us, and that I hope we will be able to shed more light on as we try to come with positive, cooperative ways to deal with issues like DPRK questions and others. So, Mr. Chairman, I will yield back whatever remains of my time.
Thank you, that's very kind. That's another drink for everyone. The final word, Dr. Choi.
Yes, I have just a couple of points, actually 3 points, to my colleagues from the US and maybe a couple of points to my Chinese colleague. One, actually, we have been hearing the US people, US commitment to East Asia. I heard that the same rhetorics about 15 years ago when the United States announced the EASR, EAS2. But actually, since then, it's forgotten about 10 years. Sometimes we cannot rule out the possibility the East Asian issue would be hijacked by other issues from other regions. So how can you guarantee the US commitment, not just verbally, but in action? We need more concrete action. United States proved it is a regional power in East Asia. So I think there should be more action to be taken by the United States. Of course, over the past years, the United States has been very active in diplomatic way. But what about the other area? Trade, I think the United States cannot surpass the China in the trade issue, but actually the future will be seen. So I like to have more concrete action done by the United States to prove itself is a regional power, as well in military way and also diplomatic in other areas. To my colleague from China, General Pan, with all my respect, there's a disconnect between what China says and what China does. So how does you should try to narrow the gap between deed and words. Peaceful resolution, you said that. But has ever China tried the peaceful resolution through a diplomatic way? We have a dispute with China. But I hope China to honor the norms and regulation procedures we are familiar with, actually we have built over the past several decades. So from that regard, so I think that there should be more strategic dialogue between the United States and China. Of course, we like to. Second point, like China should avoid criticizing the ROK-US alliance. When we had a summit, Chinese spokesperson of foreign ministry criticized the US ROK alliance as remains of the Cold War. So I hope you have to look at the nature of alliance that has transformed over the past 5 or 7 years. So alliance right now is quite different what you are talking nowadays. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this panel has brilliantly confounded my efforts to stir up discord and despair. But I think it's also illuminated the fact that, despite the present relative stability, there are some real problems for all sides to tackle. I think each of the speakers has been brilliant, so I think we should say thank you.